Hey guys, what's up? So Nvidia GeForce Now has made a pretty big splash this year, and it's something that we've covered quite a lot. It's launched on iPad, iPhone, obviously it's finally gone into its consumer tier as well, and there's been some pretty big improvements on the service, so we thought it's about time that we reviewed it from the perspective of what Nvidia GeForce Now is like to use at the end of 2020. So come along, find out our thoughts, and we'll be putting footage throughout the video as well, and I'll make sure I label it so I show off what platform it's working on. Is it on Wi-Fi? Is it on mobile connection through 4G or 5G? And is it being used over Ethernet cable as well? So let's find out our thoughts on how Nvidia GeForce Now holds up at the end of 2020. So to kick things off, if you're unfamiliar with what GeForce Now is, basically it's a game streaming service from Nvidia, but one of the beauties of this is it lets you play your own game library. So if you own something, for example, on Steam or on Epic Games or Good Old Games, whichever platform you're using, if it's available on Nvidia GeForce Now, you'll be able to just synchronize your library and stream it to pretty much any platform you like. So you can stream it onto your MacBook, obviously because they don't really do gaming, put it onto your iPhone, your iPad, and just on the go. And it's pretty unique in that respect. Unlike things like Google Stadia, where you have to pay for the game or you have to pay for your subscription as well, and then you don't necessarily own the game on any other platform. So this is where Nvidia GeForce Now really shines, and it's one thing that I absolutely love about it. So first thing is, how does it perform? And actually, it's one of those things that just seems to be getting better and better and better. So some of the samples and the footage you're seeing, they all play really well. And one of the things that really surprised me about this was how well it worked on mobile connection. So if you're using it on a mobile phone or on something like a tablet that has 4G connectivity, it works surprisingly well. And I didn't really see that much dropout. I didn't see too much latency. There was some issues with image stabilization, stuff like that. But for the most part, it was a very playable experience. Wi-Fi is probably the one that gets the most spotty, but that's just down to my network at home. And even though I've got really good internet speeds at home, my Wi-Fi connectivity can be relatively poor at times, so that's why I experience dropouts. But for the most part, it works really well. Plugging it in via Ethernet cable is probably the best way to play it. So when I played it on my gaming PC, which is hooked up directly to my router, things worked basically like I was playing natively on the device. And the biggest example of this was on Cyberpunk. So when I actually loaded it up onto my gaming PC, which has a GTX 1080 Ti, things were just never really above 30 frames per second. Everything was sloppy, it was all over the place, had choppy graphics, loading in issues. But when I played it on GeForce Now, I was able to max out, and even though I wasn't getting a consistent 60 frames per second, it was always above 50, and everything was maxed out with RTX on, and everything was maxed out, and that was including ray tracing as well. So the game looked much better when I was streaming it than when I was playing it natively on my PC. Now that's a relatively unique example because obviously it's unoptimized at the moment, so there are issues there with Cyberpunk in itself, but it does demonstrate how good this service can be when you have ideal conditions. The addition of iPad and iPhone streaming as well is a massive thing. It's been one of the big news stories this year that Apple are very much against game streaming, but Nvidia have managed to make it work in a web app, and it works surprisingly well. I didn't really expect it to work particularly well because obviously it's all just running through Safari, but actually it works as I'd expect it to from an application. So when you load it up on an iPad or an iPhone, you can use different controllers. So if you have a Bluetooth controller like an Xbox controller or a PlayStation controller, you can use those. There's a whole range of them supported, and you can also use on-screen touch controls as well. Now they're a bit fidgety and you don't have much options when it comes to the touch screen, so it's a bit of a pain. I do wish that Nvidia would bring in some different transparency options, some customization options, so you could change the transparency of the buttons, the size of them and stuff like that. But for the most part, it works pretty well, which is really handy. And like I said, the whole thing just works really well. I didn't experience too many issues with it dropping out, and the device and the application just looks like it was made especially for the iPhone or the iPad, and it's not running through a web app. So, hats off to them there. If you are going to be somebody who's using this service at home, on your devices when you're out and about, it's surprisingly good. So literally this year, Nvidia have brought GeForce Now to a whole range of devices. You can get it on your tablets, you can get it through your web browser, you can get it on your Android TVs, you can get it on your PC, you can get it on your Macs. So it pretty much dominates all of those things. So in reality, it almost seems like it is the ideal thing to go for. You buy your games on Steam or any other platform, and then you have them available on this platform to stream. And when you actually have hardware that supports it, great, you can then suddenly load it up. So in this day and age where people are struggling to get hold of different consoles, they're struggling to get hold of graphics cards because they're just out of stock all the time, it seems like a really good offer for a stopgap. Not to mention, they offer a free tier, which gives you an hour of playtime, There are sometimes queues, unfortunately, and then there is a $5 tier as well, which is meant to give you priority over the queues. It doesn't let you skip them completely, as we've found out very recently, and it also gives you up to 4 hours of playtime, and you also get ray tracing as well with that $5 tier. So depending on how much you use this service, it might be worthwhile, but at least you get to try it out for free and see whether or not it works for you, your setup, your devices, and your connection. So that is a bonus. So like I said, it all seems pretty much perfect, but it's not. And there are a few really major issues with GeForce Now that absolutely need to be addressed, and sooner rather than later, because this is now a consumer product. NVIDIA have pushed it out there, and there was then a big hurrah from, I suppose, publishers rather than developers. Publishers like money. We know publishers like money, and they wanted to find a way to monetize this, and they didn't like the fact that NVIDIA were basically pushing out these games to different platforms without their say-so. So unfortunately, a lot of games got pulled in the very initial stages. Now, a prime example of this is 2 weeks ago, I think it was 77 games available on my library to play. As of today, when I'm recording this review, I have 74 games available to play through NVIDIA GeForce Now. I haven't refunded any, I haven't deleted any from my library. That's publishers pulling those from NVIDIA GeForce Now service so that I can't play them, and that's a pain. If you're somebody who's going to go all in on GeForce Now and you're going to pay and subscribe to it, and then you suddenly find out the game that you've been playing with all of your friends has just disappeared, that becomes a pretty major issue, and it means it's really something that most people aren't going to be able to take seriously or invest in. And NVIDIA needs to do something more about this to stop this kind of just games disappearing. It feels very much like Netflix at the moment, where games will appear and then, you know, a few months later they disappear, and I don't entirely know what they need to do to fix that. And there is an issue there with publishers not wanting it this way. Obviously, NVIDIA wanting to serve it up to all the different customers. It's just a bit of a nightmare at the moment, and it's one of the biggest Achilles heels for this service, because you're paying for your own games, but you're not allowed to play with them how you would like to, which is just a pain. And like I said, if you have a game that you're playing all the time and you're invested in, and suddenly it gets pulled and disappears, that's just not ideal. Another major issue is the fact that there are queue times, and I don't mean just on the free tier, because I kind of expect that to happen. When it landed on iPhone and iPad, the queue times just suddenly shot up. I never really used to see them on the free tier, but then they were there pretty much all the time, and I guess that's because so many people are playing it at the moment. So many people want to be able to get their hands on Fortnite, even though it's not available just yet, and they are working on it, but so many people want to be able to play these PC games on their mobile phones, and that's completely understandable. So that free tier got absolutely flooded. But then when Cyberpunk came out, we decided we were going to use the Founders Edition to really test it out and just go to town on this service and see what it's all about. And I had some crazy queue times, 20 to 30 minutes in the Founders Edition. And ultimately, if a new game comes out and it's very popular and it drives those wait times up, it's going to drive people away from the service. Imagine trying to log on to this game when all your friends are online and you want to be able to play it pretty much straight away, but you've got to wait 20 to 30 minutes. Again, it's just not ideal, and it puts another, I guess, nick in this entire service. NVIDIA GeForce Now is really propositioned towards people being able to play it on the go. So if you're at work and then you go off on your lunch break, you think, you know what, I want to play some Witcher 3 or I want to play some Cyberpunk, and you go to load it up, but you've got to wait 20 minutes. It just kind of defeats the object, which is a pain. And queue times aren't the only things that hold this up. So numerous times when I've logged into this, I've gone into Steam, loaded up my game, and then it's had to reinstall the game and re-download it. Now, this doesn't seem to be an issue all of the time. A lot of the time, games just load as if they were already there, which is great. But there have been quite a few times where I've gone to load a game and it's had to re-download the whole thing, install it, and then let me boot up. And that can often take 10 to 15 minutes to just get going. And again, if you're waiting for a queue time and then you're having to wait for something to get installed, it just creates a really bad experience. If you're on the free tier, that means pretty much your entire hour is already used up by the time you've installed this game, and it needs ironing out. There are so many little issues like that hold things up and stop this being a quick pick up your phone or quick pick up your iPad, load up a game and just go. And because of that, it makes it really hard to recommend. So to sum up, NVIDIA got so many things right. It's a really, really smooth service. I've got to admit, it's one of the smoothest gaming services I have used in a very long time. And personally, I have been using this service since it very first came out, and it was in the very early stages where you would have it and they gave you a set amount of games and you didn't get access to your games library. And it has just gotten better and better and better. It is very, very playable on pretty much any connection, whether it be Wi-Fi, 4G or hooked up directly via Ethernet. All of these things work as long as the internet connection is strong enough, and I've got to say, even on limited connections, it does a really good job. They have a free tier, so you can try it out yourself and see whether or not it works for you, your hardware and your connection setup. But as I said, it is really hard to recommend going for that paid tier because there are still queues and there are still teething issues in the background. And the biggest drawback is, until Nvidia can sort out this whole issue of publishers pulling games, it's just not a service I could recommend to take seriously for gaming. You could go and invest in something like an Nvidia Shield TV, you could have it on your iPhone, and you could have it on your PC and not upgrade your graphics card. But then when that game that you're playing all the time and you're playing with your friends suddenly gets pulled by the publisher, what do? You then have to ultimately get hardware that's capable of playing it, and that's just frustrating. There needs to be some kind of guarantee that your games are going to stay on there, even an option to purchase games through the publisher that are then going to work, or buy a license for streaming. There needs to be something that they iron out in the background with publishers to get games on there and just to give us access to our entire library. Like I said, if it's a paid upgrade, fine. At least have the option for people so that they know that game is going to be available for them on this platform that they want to play on. So until that's sorted, it's probably not worth paying for. It's nice to have things like ray tracing, it's nice to have the longer play sessions, but at the end of the day, the free tier pretty much covers everything you're going to need. So try it out, see how it works for you, and if it's got the games library on there that you want and that you are using, and the whole setup works for you, then it's definitely worthwhile giving a go and maybe paying for that extra paid tier. But at the moment, the free tier does a good enough job, and I don't think that the paid tier offers enough, and I don't think that Nvidia are doing enough to make sure that the games that we want are on there. So, you know what, balls in your court. Try it out. It's an amazing service, and they've done so incredibly well. I'm really excited to see what happens next year. We'll be sure to do a follow-up review in probably 3 to 6 months' time just to see whether or not things like the touchscreen controls have been updated. See, Fortnite's going to be coming out at some point in the very near future, and it's been optimized to use that touchscreen completely without having the overlay, so it'll be very interesting to see how that looks. And hopefully we might see some of those games return as well, and Nvidia do something to get publishers just getting their games back on there. In the meantime, hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, hit the subscribe button because we'll be having all sorts of awesome content coming up in the future. If you want to interact with us, by all means pop some things down in the comments below, or pop on over to our social media channels that we've got linked in the description. In the meantime, stay safe, and we'll be back soon. Bye.